It's been 6 years of podcasting, and without our sponsors, we wouldn't be able to bring these podcasts to you. So I want to thank today's sponsors. And first off, we have the Pretentious Pickle Company of 190 Water Street in Plymouth. If you haven't had a chance to get down there, go down and check out what they make. They have everything pickled you can imagine, from pickled beets to carrots to mushrooms to onions to Brussels sprouts and cauliflower. They even have pickled or pickle flavor cotton candy, I should say. They make it fresh there every day, and you can go in there and check out what they have to offer. And if you're not in the Plymouth area, you can go to pretentiouspickle.com and check out what they have to offer there as well, and they will ship it out to you. Their stuff is delicious. You should check it out, and they are big fans of ours, and we are big fans of theirs. So thank you to the Pretentious Pickle Company for sponsoring today's episode. And our second sponsor today is Moonrise Cinemas. Moonrise Cinemas is a new drive-in in Plymouth, right on the Plymouth-Kingston line. They are located at 428 Court Street in Plymouth, Mass. And they offer a great selection of movies. You can go. It's very family-friendly. I went and checked out the Goonies there. They've had Marvel movies, a wide variety of stuff. And they're really starting to expand. They have had the Rocky Horror Picture Show this coming year. They're doing music on Thursday nights. On Wednesdays are going to be 420 friendly events. So make sure you check out what they have to offer. MoonriseCinemas.com. It's a great venue. They have a beer garden. They have their own food. Their food's phenomenal. And they're bringing back their French toast, which I'm very excited about. So make sure you check out what they have to offer, MoonriseCinemas.com. And if you use code Inebri-art when purchasing tickets, you'll get 10% off. So make sure you go to MoonriseCinemas.com to get your tickets for movies, concerts, and more. And use code Inebri-art for 10% off on your purchase. And now let's jump right into the podcast.
Across the line, the Gulf Stream, I've been in Tampa Bay, around the Horn, and home again, 'cause that is the sailor's way.
Welcome back to the Old Colony Cast, a podcast about all things Plymouth and surrounding areas. I am your host, Andy. And I am joined today, as always, by co-host Hanna.
Hello.
And Fish is here, too.
And our Pilgrim producer, Fish. Can you edit out that part where you talked?
Pilgrim producer?
Pilgrim producer. Yeah,
Okay.
That's what I went with today.
In no way, shape, or form do I produce pilgrims.
No, you are a pilgrim that produces. Like in the...
You're on a journey.
In the John Wayne Howdy Pilgrim kind of way.
Oh.
That's like the least plausible.
You know what?
I don't see it.
Let's just accept it.
Yeah. I feel like if John Wayne saw you, you'd be like, Howdy Pilgrim, or,
Yeah.
more John Wayne-y sounding voice.
Yeah, that was pretty good.
Yeah. Was it?
No.
It was like he was here.
I thought it was him. Jeez Louise.
It's today on the Seance podcast.
Yeah, I know. All right.
Well, what are we talking about today?
Thank you.
I was going to get there.
I was going to
Don't rush
ask
me.
me what we're talking about.
I know my one job.
Please, no. So we're going to be talking about the once was Martha's Vineyard deaf community
Oh,
and the Martha's Vineyard Sign Language. Did you forget about this?
I don't remember this at all.
Amazing, yeah.
Okay, I didn't remember anything we were doing, so.
Well,
Okay.
when the last one that she started talking about, I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. That
Cheers.
sounds familiar.
Yes.
Yeah. This one doesn't sound familiar at all.
Yeah.
Almost to the point where I'm like, that was a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I found out about this, and it's like fairly common knowledge. I just don't know if you're not going to seek out things having to do with either Martha's Vineyard or the deaf community, you may not ever know about it.
Mm-hmm.
So Donnie and I, over the summer, went to Martha's Vineyard and just spent the day like hopping around on their bus system, and took the bus to Aquina. And it happens to be a fairly lengthy bus ride from where you get dropped off.
Okay.
So it's like on the other side of the island. And the bus driver said, I don't know like what was going on, but he's like, hey, we got a special treat for you today. It's a little bit of a ride, and I'm going to just give you some oral history.
Oh.
So he started telling us all about Martha's Vineyard.
So it would be like if you drove a bus on Martha's Vineyard.
And this is how Hannah met her new best friend.
And he talked about just why it's called Martha's Vineyard, and that just a lot of natural wild grapes grow on the island. So
Yeah.
it seemed like a next step. Obviously not the native name to
Correct.
the island, but
Now the Vineyard part makes way more sense.
yeah, and then just what, how the different towns got settled. I don't remember every little bit of it, but what really caught my attention was now this is what he said, and it's not really what I found out, and there is a connection, but not as much of a connection as this
Lying
gentleman.
bus drivers.
And I mean, he's like of the area, so maybe there's something a little bit more to it than I am picking up from what I've read, but he said that Martha's Vineyard had a very high deaf population at one point, and had its own sign language and helped birth American Sign Language. So I was like, that's really crazy. And he kept spitting off some facts at us
Yep.
that I'm going to tell you about now. He also continued to, once we pulled into Aquina, talk about the tribe that's currently there. He talked a lot about Native history. It was he went on about anything that he saw and remembered to talk about. It was really cool.
Yeah.
No other bus driver did
I
that.
literally
that day.
feel like this is like taking a ride with Hannah in the car.
It was no other bus driver
Yeah.
did it that day. It was just a really we happened to luck out. I was like, this is pretty sweet.
Free tour.
Yeah, exactly. So we're gonna start off with just the history of the deaf community in Martha's Vineyard and work our way up to current times with it, I guess. So it's recorded that Jonathan Lambert or his children were the first to settle in Martha's Vineyard, kind of way after Martha's Vineyard had been colonized.
Okay.
So colonized in a little bit before, between the Pilgrims landing in 1640, in that ballpark, it was colonized, and then started being settled by more English and having.
So when he's the
move
first
there.
settler, first non-native.
What was that?
He would be the first non-native?
He was not the first person to settle there.
Oh, I thought you said he was.
No, I'm just saying that.
Oh, I misunderstood what you
Yes,
said.
yes,
I'm sorry,
yes.
sorry.
So either him or his children were the first deaf people.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that part, and I'm not making a joke.
In Andy's defense.
You didn't hear it either, did you?
No,
right.
when Hannah said it,
All right.
I didn't hear the word deaf.
I guess I meant they were one of the first after,
Okay.
and I didn't get to the deaf part probably.
Okay. All right.
So I read both options, that he moved there and settled in 1694, or it was his children and it was 1714. So
Okay.
a couple variations on the date. Also, I used there was an article from the Atlantic, Wikipedia, and another ioycs.org. I don't think I wrote that down, and my quick hand is a little wrong, but I can follow up on that if that's incorrect.
Okay.
But they all kind of said the same thing with a few variations in dates.
Yeah.
So it was him that came, so the Lamberts, or his children, and they were from Kent in England.
Yeah.
You know about Kent?
Yeah.
I know nothing about it.
I mean, I've heard of it.
Is it like a region or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's in eastern England off the top of my head.
Okay. And then from Kent, they were from an area specifically called Weld. So I guess it's a town or
Okay.
some sort of community.
Village.
I
Yeah.
think it's the Weald.
The Weald.
Going by quick Googling.
Yeah.
is
There you go.
My vague ability to pronounce random British garbage.
Thank you. Appreciate it. So,
I got one job.
yes, exactly. So I don't know, what was unclear is, so he had children there. I guess continued to have children there. And I don't know if it's just from this one family that created the deaf community there, or if it was more deaf people, maybe because he had family members back home from England that came also.
Okay.
Either way, it does get a little choppy with the closeness of the community. because it was a hereditary.
It was a hereditary reason why they were deaf?
Yes.
Okay.
It wasn't like he didn't just become deaf. It wasn't a physical
Well, usually
reaction
if
to
you're deaf
something.
and your kids are deaf.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Typically.
Yeah, rarely it's a same accident.
Yeah, exactly. So Nora Ellen Grace, she's an anthropologist, and she traced the genealogy of the descendants of the settlers, and she's the one who kind of like figured out where they came from.
Yeah.
The Weald.
The Weald.
Yes. And it said that they came using Kent Sign Language, which was like a form of like of sign.
Yeah, the
back
regional sign
Yes.
dialect kind of thing.
then. So when they started
It was
signing-
sign language with a British accent.
Yeah.
Everything they signed was with their pinkies out. They were very posh.
Yeah. So when they came over, it had to adapt to what Martha's Vineyard life was. So
Okay.
that's kind of how Martha's Vineyard sign language became what it was, because it was different stuff happening. A fully new community of people away from England. So it became its own language, essentially.
Right.
And it was the first signing in the Americas.
Okay.
So it was just kind of cool. Or not like the first signing. I think there were probably other, but like in that community aspect.
Right. It was kind of like the first multiple people
Yeah.
that using the same.
So the deaf community settled mostly in Chilmark.
Okay.
And I don't know if you guys know the island very well.
Not really.
No.
So that is like, compared to the other towns, it is really off the beaten path. It would take like a day or two to get there.
I used to
Back in
mean
the
like
day.
then.
Okay. I was going to say,
Now-
like,
Island's
bus?
not that big.
Now it's just a bus ride.
Island's not that big. I mean,
Yeah.
Especially like with how the island was that when it was first colonized, like
Yeah.
they didn't have the roads,
No golf carts.
No.
Yeah.
so
Very
really
little public transportation.
really rough goings
your
getting
neighbor's
across
horse.
the island. So
The
if
Wi-Fi was terrible.
yeah, if you lived in Chilmark, you were pretty isolated. Which kind of added to the growth of the deaf community, because that's just where his family settled.
Right.
So it became so common to have so many deaf people in the area that everyone was maybe not fluent, but used the sign language, both hearing and deaf, which I thought was interesting, because deaf people we don't do that now.
No, but
No,
if we were
but-
in a community full of
But it-
deaf, I
yeah.
feel like
I mean, it's the kind of thing where, if you live in, like, parts of New Bedford, or Fall River, you know a little Portuguese, you live
Yeah.
in certain parts of the country, you pick up some Spanish because, well, you need to talk to your neighbors.
Right.
So if you're growing up in Chilmark and a significant part of the population is deaf, then you're going to pick up at least some basic sign just so you can, talk to your next door neighbor or
I feel like
go
that's,
shopping.
That's the communal way to do it. I don't think that's the case for every community in the United States. But okay, besides the point, we could get down a
Yeah.
whole different path.
That is a
I don't think there's any kind of deaf community on any scale. Like, I mean, there's schools,
and
but I mean, that's
things
all.
that we know of.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
True.
Like, so at its height, like of population,
Yeah.
there 155 people on the island were deaf.
Wow.
1 in 25 in Chilmark were deaf. And
Wow.
then 1 in 4 in the village Squibnocket, which was just like a little part of Chilmark. 1 in 4 were deaf.
Yeah, I feel like that's a big portion of your community.
Yeah,
so.
it's huge.
Yeah,
huge, huge.
I'm sorry. When 1 in 4 people in town or in the village, which is
Yeah.
Right.
I don't know how big the village is, but yeah, you need to be able to. They can't get that. You can't ignore them. So you've got you pick it up.
So yeah, they were very much involved with just the day to day. It wasn't like a segregation type of thing going on at all
Yeah.
by them being over like in that part of town that just so happened to be where.
It wasn't like you deaf people go over
Yeah,
there.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
just happened to be where
It's
they
where
were.
their families live,
Yeah.
so they're
Yeah.
kind of
And obviously, so
Which honestly, a little surprising. I feel like it would be the other way around.
so the
Well, I suppose it's different when everyone grows up like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
it's tough.
just that time. I feel like that time is when they were like, "Ugh, you're different. Go away."
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like you're different. Oh, now my nephew, and then it's just tougher to. It's probably a lot more difficult when it's everybody, and it can be anybody.
So
Sure.
before I'm trying to get back onto what I was talking about. So
Sorry.
Did we derail the conversation?
no. But they were very much. It was more of an inclusive thoughtfulness.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't like a question of whether or not they would be a part of the day to day. They just were.
They just were.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To the point where I think someone from out of town went to a town meeting, and I guess the term at the time that was used was deaf mute, which on the island they found very
Offensive.
inaccurate and offensive, and everyone got really upset. Like not just the deaf
Oh, the
mute.
the person who came to the meeting was like,
oh,
didn't know y'all were deaf
he,
mutes.
He asked if the deaf mutes were allowed to vote.
Okay, well that's offensive for several reasons.
Yeah. So it was not only the terminology, just the inquiry.
Yeah.
They were like, oh, why wouldn't they be? You know what I mean? So I mean, and just to, I love the inclusiveness of it. I believe there is a couple articles that were like there might have been some incidents of I don't want to say hatefulness, but something towards that.
But you're always going to have
ableist
those people.
things.
You still have that.
But I think in the time too, where everyone kind of had to put in their own work, and the day wasn't going to make it if you weren't contributing to society. So, like, what if for some reason the colonists had just this real spitefulness attitude towards deaf people? It would have been a bad time,
especially
for them.
when 1 in 4.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's not the one guy that you're crapping all
you've
over.
Now ticked off a quarter of the populace, and also, their families, which is probably the other 3/4 of the population. So good luck.
Yeah, no. So it was not the way it turned out at all. It was very much like part of the community inclusive attitude of the whole thing. So, where are we now? So, like I said, the Martha's Vineyard Sign Language catered to like their way of life, so it is just so different from what we have today.
Yeah.
Because they were fishermen, small-time farmers, and whalers.
Okay.
So they used it in many different ways, but hearing people who were specifically fishermen and out on the water would use it.
Like it's to communicate.
Yeah,
Sure, yeah.
exactly.
I feel like it'd be very useful.
And then, not everyone was fluent. Fishermen would use it. Oh, at one point, Alexander Graham Bell did a study on, like, the population because it was just an incredible thing going on.
Yeah.
But, like, I mean, nothing really great came from his study, just that he really had no idea how genetics worked. Like, not a lot of people did.
Yeah.
But he was just like, this person's grandfather had it, and then this person's grandfather had it. And
Isn't that weird?
Yeah. Like, no sure conclusions, but it was hereditary. So it was just kind of, it feels like it could be obvious where it's like, oh, yeah, their parents have it, they're going to have it. So
Yeah.
You'd figure at least some people would pick it up because it's not like they hadn't already been. Like, farmers breed for certain traits with animals, and people are basically just, you basically.
Well, you're also coming from an understanding that people are animals, and that at that time might not have been widely considered.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
So, some things to understand too why the deaf population was so high. I know I don't need to explain genetics, and that if there's 2 deaf parents, it's very likely that their child would be deaf. But there were also people who were not born deaf but ended up with the recessive gene by having someone in their family that was deaf.
Right.
So I think this idea of were there any people were their cousins getting married? That kind of thing. How close were the relations?
If it's few enough people at the beginning, then.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I was saying. I don't know how many, like, what from the
it was
deaf
a
community
close community.
But I don't want to imply that because we don't know.
Okay.
So what I'm saying is, I think if that recessive gene gets passed around to enough neighbors, you could still end up with quite a few
Sure.
Yeah.
deaf people in the community, even without just 2 deaf parents coming from that. However, it was said that even though marriages happened between deaf and hearing people, they did marry mostly between deaf and deaf.
Okay.
Just because, I don't know, similarities, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I've lived life this way, you've lived life that way. I feel like we usually end up with the people who understand us the best. Hopefully.
Okay.
Knock on wood. That's the idea, right?
I don't know. I feel like she just said no one understands me. That's a roundabout way to insult me.
That's what we go for, I think.
Andy, we don't do roundabout ways here.
So it was typically what happened. Not to say that was always the case, but again, just was.
It just was.
It just was.
Yeah.
You
And-
marry in your own community, more likely.
Yes.
And again, when 1 in 4, the odds you find one of those people with that same is much higher than.
Right.
Yeah.
And then them living in Chilmark too, just like grew that because no one felt like hopping
Going
on
a
Tinder,
day and a half down the road.
And I hopping on Tinder.
seeing who was available on the other side
Yeah.
of the island.
Tinder being the farmer's horse
Yeah.
that you rode to get to the next town.
But I'm sure it's one of those, like, if you were deaf and you were in this community that was so inclusive, you had to have known, heard about, or visited other communities that weren't, and then
Yeah,
just be
you-
like, why would I leave?
I'm
You know?
sure. I'm sure. Yeah. 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 Had to.
I can go to the big city where I can get discriminated against.
Right.
You know?
I wonder what the big city would have been in Martha's Vineyard, Edgartown.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Well, they still have boats that left. I mean, they could have
Yeah.
gone to the mainland
So speaking of
and gone somewhere fancy like Hyannis.
going to the mainland, 1817, what is now the American School for the Deaf, opened in Connecticut, which started the migration off the island
Okay.
of the deaf community because they now had a school available to them.
Where they could get educated.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
Sure.
So I think there were schools on Martha's Vineyard. And
Yep.
They used sign in them also, but where there was a school that specifically catered to deaf people, I obviously was alluring and drove a lot of people to actually move, and like a lot. That was It was like considered a migration. So the last person that was deaf and used Martha's Vineyard Sign Language died in 1952.
Wow.
So it's been since 1952 that any deaf person using the original Martha's Vineyard Sign Language has been there.
No.
So the language is considered extinct.
Yes.
Now, I'm asking you this, and I don't know if you have an answer, but how different was it? Like, was it?
So it's actually really hard to know because there's no recorded history of it.
Yeah.
It was only told by oral history, which is nuts.
Which is
just,
I'm sorry.
It's a very
Okay,
ironic thing to
say
say that the sign
oral
language is
history.
only.
So the reason we know about it is from people talking about it. Someone in 1952, I think there was like an article done on her.
Yeah.
That the Katie West, and then they talk about her, but there's no.
No one took pictures.
Yes, they
Yeah,
didn't do
there's no, like,
diagrams.
video or
and
anything.
I mean, maybe they didn't record the language at all.
Yeah.
So there's no like Martha's Vineyard Sign Language Dictionary.
Yes,
So it's
there's none of
legit
that.
extinct.
Yes,
Yeah, it's gone.
And they so like the reason people know about it, other than like random articles, is just like we used to have this,
Yeah.
like the guy talking on the bus, like
Yeah, we used to have an island-specific sign language.
Yes.
What did it look like? No one knows because everyone who used it is dead.
yes, and then
It was like regular sign language, but no R. Huh? Boston accent joke? No?
Okay,
Nothing?
yeah, I
Nothing?
gotcha. So it definitely is just one of the missing things of Martha's Vineyard history. It was never recorded. I know I've already said this, but literally, there's nothing left.
It's just
of it.
gone.
It's just gone. No diagrams.
Yeah.
No instructional booklets. Nothing. There were some hearing people still alive that remembered it and still remembered some signs up until I think they said like the 80s, but not like a fluent way.
Right.
And they still didn't write any of it. So the people who
Kills you, right? Like,
yeah,
especially nowadays where it's so easy to record stuff. It's
I
just
know.
like, ugh.
and then there's still no. They're working on it. They're working on like a reclamation of it somehow. I don't know.
I was gonna say how.
I don't know how, but I feel like I don't know. So it feels like a national treasure type.
I mean,
of thing.
you'd have
Yeah.
to go to.
You'd have to.
Maybe the school in Connecticut would have like
Well,
notes
right.
because if nothing else, they would have had to teach
The-
everyone
from who signed the Martha's Vineyard sign.
everyone who
language, yeah.
spoke Martha's Vineyard,
Right.
like what was it, ASL at the time?
No, so ASL was invented after. They used like a French sign
Okay,
at that school. They used a combination of 3 different sign language, and then it morphed into what we know as American Sign Language.
so they would have to teach it, or God, maybe find some like they would need to translate
Yeah.
because you need someone who spoke and it's not the right word. I don't know if even if
Sign?
it is the right word. You would need someone who knew Martha's Vineyard Sign Language to translate what you were trying to teach them.
Yeah.
You might be able to like,
I mean, you'd have like written stuff, but
if you could figure out like what part of ASL came from the French sign language, and
Mm-hmm.
so those 3, and like what came from the other one, maybe you could discern some of the things that came from Martha's Vineyard.
that's assuming anything did.
Yeah, it didn't
True.
really.
Oh, I thought you said it was combined in the.
No,
all right.
it
right,
wasn't
right.
part of, I think Kent was still part of the combined one.
Oh,
and
okay, I misunderstood.
Yeah. So Martha's Vineyard was not part of anything that was used outside of there. For that school, I believe.
Interesting.
But that's what we know. What if it was? Like, what if something, you know what I mean?
Right.
So
I'm sure there's someone who has a doctorate in sign language
Yeah.
that be like morons.
And then
we know about that.
yeah, I used only a couple articles for this that I said at the beginning, but I did go through and read several others, and they all have that same like what's quote unquote common knowledge of it, and it's really all the same stuff.
Yeah.
So even going deeper into like other sources to see if they said anything kind of different, it's not. So hoping that maybe someone has something somewhere is like there's probably an update hopefully of like reclaiming it or like figuring out what it
Yeah.
was. I feel like Fish
so I
has
was
something.
looking at it. I was trying to figure because so if Martha's Vineyard came from Old Kentish,
Yeah.
did anyone record Old Kentish and kind of like reconstruct from there? But now I'm looking at it and it doesn't look like anyone who moved from Kent to Martha's Vineyard was deaf, and they don't know if anyone moving there knew Old Kentish sign, so it might just be assumed. Like, basically, everyone, like,
Yeah.
the people who moved from, like, the initial Kentish to Martha's Vineyard migration didn't have any deaf people, so...
Except for the first guy that came from there.
Did he come from Kent?
Yeah.
Yeah. Weren't you listening to the beginning of the podcast?
Yeah.
I was like,
like
oh,
the
this is
legit
Sorry.
first thing she said.
I'm sorry, I'm looking at... I believe the paper is called Multilingualism, the Global Approach to Sign Language. And that's a quote from the paper, which is 20 years old, but I
I
don't
will
know.
say too, like I said, they were really wishy-washy with whether or not it was his kids or
Yeah,
him.
you were still. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's iffy
Yes.
in so many ways. So it's like...
and I almost think like it didn't really explain if he was deaf or if his kids were, and if it was his kids, then
Then he could have been there and not been. Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
He could have been it could have been recessive with him. So
Right.
yeah. So it is such a very... There's just... I don't know if there's enough there.
It's just
for-
weird that like a small minority was overlooked by history. That never happens.
That's wild. Can't believe there's so little about this.
Yeah, you know.
I know. I would be interested, like I said, obviously I looked at several things on this, but I'm like, I want to go back to Martha's Vineyard.
To find that bus driver.
No.
And I'll be like, he died 50 years ago.
There hasn't been a bus driver here in 200 years now. But if you go to those places and you go to like the old buildings, they usually have some sort of like information on them, you know?
Yeah.
And I feel like I usually end up finding out a lot of stuff just by like going to the place and reading the plaques that they put up from like, you know, Like
Yeah.
the historical society like writes all of them.
Right.
Yeah. And you usually end up finding out stuff that like just isn't for some reason recorded on the internet
Yeah.
because it's been on that sign for 50 years.
Yeah. There's so many like interesting things like that.
Yeah.
Where it's like they'll be like, oh, we just found this in our collection.
Yeah.
There's some book or, sample of some kind that, like, yeah, it's been on its shit. Like it's been there. No one's asked about it. It's just
Right.
been sitting on the shelf for like 70 years.
Collecting dust.
Yeah.
I almost forgot to, so I said the fishermen used
Sign language.
the Martha's Vineyard sign language, but the kids also would use it in school to talk behind the teacher's back.
Oh, but of course.
Yeah, or to sign behind the teacher's
Yeah.
back, communicate. And I mean, I really hope that maybe one day they could get a little bit more on this, but I
Yeah.
thought it was really cool enough to share what I know and what I've learned, and something I want to revisit in person for sure.
That is a cool.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I'm poking around on mostly Wikipedia.
Yeah.
He's
yeah.
fact checking your facts.
Yeah,
I'm
I
a little
know.
bit, because I'm curious, because like I realized I don't know where ASL came from, and it's like Hannah said, mostly French.
Yeah.
But the original teacher at the Connecticut school kind of creoled it with whatever
Yeah.
languages the kids came in speaking, and they were mostly from Martha's Vineyard.
Oh, okay.
So
it could be
Yeah.
in there enough to
Yeah,
kind of like.
basically, he realized he was trying to teach them in French, but he was picking up a lot of their sign.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was just easier for him to pick it up than to teach them. So he was so basically, that's why it's
Mishmash.
Mishmash.
it's basically, it's to the point where it's,
You mean it's like actual English?
yeah, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, so to the point where it's like surprisingly different from the initial French that it was based on. Because he just picked up whatever anyone came in signing with and just kind of
Went
You
with
know.
that. I mean, makes sense.
tossed in the blender and saw what came out.
Heck yeah.
Well-
I mean, it would have been a big population coming from Martha's Vineyard.
Right, yeah.
You know?
And like, it's probably easier for the few people who weren't from Martha's Vineyard to,
Just pick,
pick up the
Yeah.
whatever they were doing. This reminded me there's some really good, it's at least one episode, might be a couple episodes of, our Good Friends podcast, Stuff You Missed in History Class. And by good friends, I mean people who don't know us at all.
yeah. I
About
was like, no way. What?
about schools for deaf students, and specifically about like a big movement of like why the faculty wasn't deaf kind of thing.
Yeah.
So maybe our listeners, if they want more
Oh.
that type of thing, they can.
Yeah.
I mean, you'd have to search through their thousands of episodes, but there's a search feature.
There you
Yeah.
go.
Figure it out. Google. Google's wonderful.
That's right. It's free. But yeah, that's really all I have. Maybe one day we'll have a little bit of a follow-up or an add-on for it.
I feel like we are going to have to put up a text version of this episode.
Yeah.
Transcript?
Transcript. That's the word I was looking for.
Yeah.
Something I've been looking into how to get like good transcripts, and
Right.
it's not particularly easy, but
Yes.
we're going to work on it. So if you need a transcript, we'll do our best
Yeah.
to see about that.
Yeah. Well, there's like devices for hearing impaired at this moment too. So.
Fish, get on it. Type this whole thing up. Right now. So this is the part where Fish starts crying and we stop talking.